Joining us now as we take a look at the weather for the first full week of June. We got to talk about what we are seeing with this weather pattern. Eric Snodgrass of Nutrien joins us here today. Eric, always great to catch up with you. And I know a lot of farmers very interested in how this weather is shaping up getting into this first full week of June. There's been a lot of dryness in many areas. There's been a fair amount of rain in some areas that needed it. There's been a lot going on here the last couple of weeks, Eric.
Yeah, and it's got a lot of people worried on both sides of that equation. What I mean by that is that we got places in the plains that just in the last 7 days picked up more than 10 inches of rain. I mean, they couldn't even buy 10 inches of rain over a 2-year time period, and now they've got it in 7 days. So the flooding I've seen in parts of the panhandle of Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, Kansas, Western Kansas, getting into, in fact, even over by Kansas City, they had some flooding last week, 5 inches of rain in one night. So, what it's been is it's been the farther you keep going toward the west, the more the storms have been. And it's been largely because when you look at the jet stream flow pattern, it kind of enters the west, curls up real quickly, and then dies once you get out into the Midwestern part of the United States. And so we've actually seen a lot of wind coming out of the east. We've had storms that have started and moved from east to west. That just shows you how stagnant the flow is. And as a result, we've had more upslope storms in the western mountain areas than we have had anywhere else. You got it right. There are places that are very dry. Eastern Corn Belt is very dry. I'm thinking really hard about Michigan. They've missed out on a lot of it. There are pockets in the Western Corn Belt, like sections of Nebraska, kind of along I-80 in southeastern Nebraska, not gotten much rainfall. But then you have other places like in parts of Indiana and Illinois that over the last 4 or 5 days, some local storms dropped 3 inches of rain. And it's just amazing to see what that has done to the outlook for what the market's going to do this week, because there's a lot of folks that are saying we're going to start trading weather in a huge way. And I'll be honest with you, when I hear that, what I hear is that you're going to have a 0Z run. That's the one that comes out before the markets open in the morning. And then you have a 12Z run, which comes out in the middle of the day while the markets are open. And people tend to trade that 12Z run at the very end of the afternoon, and then as soon as the markets open that night. And so that's when I think about a weather market. I see major changes based on small model fluctuations. We might go into some of that this week, because up until this point, Jesse, it's been a lot of just speculation on what the lack of rain might do in terms of damage and when's it going to come back. So I got a lot on my mind this weekend.
Well, yeah, and you bring us some great points. The markets tend to trade these model runs, one after the other on these little changes. And I want to touch on that a little bit because, for instance, here at my house, we just had a pop-up thunderstorm with a little bit of hail. And I think about all these parts in the plains, the Western plains, that have had these pop-up thunderstorms, these 1-2 inch rainfalls that they're hard to predict on these model runs, aren't they, Eric?
Well, they're nearly impossible. And the reason for that is our models, the ones we talk about all the time, like the GFS, that's the US flagship model, or the ECMWF, that's called the Euro, that's the Europeans flagship model. They're not even designed to handle convection. Okay. So they don't handle storms on purpose, because if they did, their forecast would just be terrible, because convection is so disruptive if you try to model it and don't have high enough resolution. So we don't even include it. It's just parameterized. We kind of call them non-convection allowing storm model, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does all that mean? That means you get a 7-day forecast. You're like, well, wait, we didn't have this in the forecast. In fact, we didn't have it in the forecast this morning. And the reason for that is these are unpredictable. That's fun. I actually think it's kind of a fun part of my job. Like, hey, no, we have to now cast these kind of storms. And there were a lot of places this past week that got life-saving rain out of some of these big, heavy events. In fact, I had to drive back and forth between Champaign and Decatur, Illinois, several times this weekend for a soccer tournament. There was standing water in some of the fields over there, and yet I'd go past others that looked like they were just powder. I did do some soil sampling in some of those fields, and it's kind of amazing. Now, I understand that Illinois has some incredible ability to hold water, but I've landed on a field that had been 25 days since it got rain, didn't get any this past weekend, and down about 4 inches, I could still smash that soil into a nice flat pancake. It had moisture in it. That's not true everywhere, of course. And the Eastern Corn Belt's been missing out more on these storms than the Western side of it has. But it's just a comment on where we are on summer right now.
Well, and you bring up soil sampling and things like that. And this is that time of year where things like that are very important, just to know, how much moisture we do or do not have, underneath our crop, and how long we can realistically go before we really need a drink of water, Eric.
Yeah, and I did see the corn especially getting a little defensive over the weekend. You could start to see it rolling up, and that's good. That actually tells you have an active and probably healthy plant that it
Mhm.
is capable of going into those defensive positions when it gets so hot. But the thing about it is the forecast going forward is we have another week of kind of like what we saw. And is that kicking the can down the road a bit over what we talked about last week? Yes. I was really honed in on June 8th, 9th, and 10th. I think I'm now honed in on June 10th, 11th, 12th as being the potential shift, especially for the parts of the Corn Belt, but the Mid South, especially the Ohio Valley, getting some storms during that time period. The heat's also going to go back to the Pacific Northwest. So we were hot this weekend. It's going to be hot at the beginning of this week, but all that heat's kind of getting out of here, and we're going to see some cooler weather. There's a big front coming through this week through the Corn Belt. About the last holdouts for the dry weather are going to be the far eastern Corn Belt. So I'm thinking specifically about Michigan, parts of Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania. And then I'm also thinking about the northern Corn Belt, really into Minnesota, Wisconsin, parts of the Dakotas like the Red River Valley. They're going to be a bit drier going forward as well. But as I'm talking about this, I know that it's storming right now in parts of that area, pop-up storms that weren't well
Mhm.
resolved. So yeah, this is a critical time of year, and we just need to watch this transition through June quite carefully.
Well, and we think about this as well. We talked about how the main models, GFS and the Euro model, can't really predict these pop-up storms, but we look a little bit longer range, and as you've mentioned many times, that can at least give us an idea of where we're headed. And we think out here past the 7 to 10, the 14-day models, and look, back half of June, July. A lot of times, they can at least give us an idea where we're headed, can't they?
It can, and I will be very anxious to see on Monday night when they release the new long-range European model forecast for the remainder of summer. El Nino is cranking. I mean, it is really doing its best to show up. And we also see that as we go out there toward the end of June, I've just least recently seen a big ridge building in Mexico. I mean, we put a ridge in Mexico, we are going to have ridge riding storms. It'll be it'll go. But overall, we look at the end of this month of June and what we see from the CPC, the CFSV2, and the long range European model, all three of them, they keep it stormy in the Intermountain West, stormy in the plains, stormy through the Mid South. The drier regions are going to be up around the Great Lakes Basin. That's where they keep the driest air. The heat, I don't see any part of the country just baking through the month
Mhm.
of June. I do think it's going to continue to stay hot in Canada and the Pacific Northwest, where we've seen wildfires in Canada a lot this past weekend in Quebec. Uh, so yeah, long range stuff's going to come out, and it's probably going to show the El Nino dominating. But we need to be watching the Bermuda High. Most of what our problem has been in the month of May and now into early June is the Bermuda High has not been in Bermuda; it's been closer to Spain, and that shift is what's prevented good pump of moisture, a good contrast in temperature, and the lack of good flow across much of the Great Lakes Basin, Mississippi Basin, Ohio Basin, that whole area, and that's got to get out, and we need to see it move out fast.
Before we let you go, just want to look around the rest of the globe. Any other major weather features standing out to you right now, whether it be South America, Asia, Australia, Europe, etc., Eric?
Yeah, still a lot of storms in Southern Europe, from Spain to Turkey. No real red flags right now showing up for me in parts of China, although it's been storming a little bit cool there in places. Australia, this is late fall for them, approaching winter, but they've had some heavy rains in the east and also around Perth. And I've recently heard some people just go, "Oh my gosh, it's getting so dry in South America." I'm like, wait a minute, do you not know how this works? It's supposed to be dry. They're in their dry season. Nothing about that is abnormal. That crop is done. It's just waiting on it to get harvested right now. So I think we just need to make sure we remember our meteorology about South America. May, June, July, August, nothing. I mean, that's their dry season.
A lot of things for us to keep watching this next week or so, especially here in the Corn Belt, going to be very important. We'll stay close with you and stay on top of it. Folks can sign up as well for Eric's daily weather newsletter. It will come right to your email each morning, info.nutrien.com/Snodgrass_weather. And of course, that is linked below in the description as well. Thanks, Eric. We appreciate the time as always. Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, sounds good.